Good evening. In this broadcast, the news from the television company Ostankino. Today in the Kremlin, the usual 16th meeting of the heads of state of the CIS countries was held. Present were the leaders of all 12 member countries of the Commonwealth. The first part of the meeting, which was attended only by the heads of state, was held behind closed doors. The current meeting of the heads of the Commonwealth introduced new elements into the development of integration of the CIS. Finally, a decision was adopted to create an intergovernmental economic committee, which evidently will be the foundation of the future economic union. Today's meeting was held in two stages. First, in a narrow circle in the Catherine's Auditorium, only heads of state conferred. Boris Yeltsin congratulated the presidents of Ukraine and Belarus on their elections, Leonid Kuchma and Alexander Lukashenko. The country's leaders discussed around 10 questions. Apart from the aforementioned decision to create an intergovernmental economic committee, an agreement was reached to form a transaction union, which in perspective means the uninhibited mutual conversion of all national currencies of the CIS. Previously, these documents had been initialed by the prime ministers of the majority of CIS countries. Apart from heads of state, in the conversations held in the Catherine's Auditorium was the Russian Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin and the ministers of Internal Affairs and Defense Andrei Kozyrev, Pavel Krychov, also the chairman of the Inter-Parliamentary Assembly of the CIS, Vladimir Shumeyko. After the meeting of the heads of state behind closed doors in the Catherine's Auditorium of the Kremlin, they moved to the Georgian Auditorium, and here they were joined by the heads of government, ministers of foreign affairs, and ministers of defense. Participating in the work of the summit was the chairman of the Inter-Parliamentary Assembly of the Commonwealth, Vladimir Shumeyko. The session was convened by the President Boris Yeltsin. World experience, he said, indicates that everywhere the basis of integration is the formation of a common market, a sole economic expense. The basic efforts must be directed, first of all, toward the practical realization of the agreement on creating an economic union. From agreements, it's time to move forward into forming a common economic expense which provides for the unimpeded transportation of goods and services, labor and capital. It's time to put an end to the situation where people cannot send money to their relatives and friends. Much will depend on the governments supporting the concrete directions and specializations. And of course, one must involve a broad circle of entrepreneurial structures in this work. Upon adjournment of the 16th meeting of the heads of the CIS, the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, and the Executive Secretary of the CIS, Ivan Karachena, held a press conference in the Kremlin. Was an agreement signed today about the withdrawal of the 14th Army from the territory of Moldova. Today, the heads of the government of Moldova and the Russian Federation, in the presence of the presidents of Russia and Moldova, signed an agreement about the withdrawal of the troops from the territory of Moldova gradually and about the relevant status, etc. That is, we had no disagreements over that document, and that procedure will take 3 years. Boris Nikolaevich, before you refuted the rumors about the resignation of Chernomyrdin, almost the entire world was concerned over this, except for the CIS countries. Did you get the impression that a cooling has occurred among the CIS countries toward what is happening in Russia? No. On the contrary, there's a strong leaning toward Russia now, and we have very strong two-sided ties. Also, Chernomyrdin has good relations with all the heads of the governments, and in general the CIS, and as well with the heads of state. Boris Nikolaevich, how would you assess Ukraine's position at today's meeting? And what do you anticipate from the meeting with the President of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma? I will say that this was a completely different situation than with the previous president. Today, with Ukraine, we had almost no discussion over any issue. A more detailed account of the press conference of Boris Yeltsin we will broadcast today at 21:40. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, met today in the Kremlin with the President of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma. During that conversation, they discussed questions of international relations and two-sided ties between Russia and Ukraine. Boris Yeltsin and Leonid Kuchma agreed to issue instructions to expedite preparation of a fundamental political Russian-Ukrainian pact, on the agreement on the Black Sea Fleet, and other basic questions in the relations between the two countries. It was emphasized that after preparation of the document, fully addressing the interests of both countries and peoples, the visit of the President of Russia to Ukraine would be possible. The presidents agreed to ensure that such a visit would occur in the second half of November of this year. Today, the chairman of the government of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, met in the government building on the Krasnopresna riverbank with the president of Azerbaijan, Gaidar Aliyev, the chairman of the Supreme Soviet of Tajikistan, Emomali Rakhmonov, the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, and the head of state and chairman of parliament of Georgia, Edvard Shevardnadze, on their request. During these meetings, they discussed concrete problems in the development of the two-sided economic ties. An agreement was reached to intensify joint efforts in deepening cooperation on issues of mutual interest. The chairman of the Federative Assembly, Vladimir Shumeyko, offers the President of Russia to place a veto on the federal law on making amendments and addenda to the law of the Russian Federation governing mass media. This law had been turned down by the Federative Council, but the 12th of October the State Duma adopted it by two-thirds of its votes and submitted it for signature to the President. As Interfax reports in the letter to Boris Yeltsin, the chairman of the Higher Chamber of Parliament presents the argument for his proposal that the posture contained in the law, pursuant to which organs of state rule cannot hence be founders of periodical publications, is in contradiction to other norms of the legislation governing mass media. In the opinion of Vladimir Shumeyko, the de facto ban on the government's involvement in the operations of mass media will open the way toward the annihilation of the Russian information system and will result in mass media moving under the control of shadow economy. As of the 1st of November of this year, the minimum pension in Russia will be 34,440 rubles per month. This was stated today in the federal law on the increase of the minimum level of pension adopted by the State Duma and the manner of their indexation and recalculation. Therefore, the minimum pension in November will be increased by 1.2 times compared to the pensions paid for October. Today, the deputies, extending their session till 7 p.m., had a productive day. They adopted the law on pensions, communications, the basic part of the civil code, and ratified a package of agreements. In the break between sessions, the Liberal Democratic Union of the 12th of December issued a statement. The December stated that between the three factions, the Russia's Choice, Yabloko, and the 12th of December, in theory, an agreement was reached to create a democratic bloc in the Duma. This is connected with the expected vote on confidence in the government. Relating to this event was the report of Alexis Kavets about the progress in executing the budget for the year. Promising to become the basic event of the day, the address of the Vice Premier didn't justify anticipations. The report, to a great degree, was reiterated yesterday's speech of Viktor Chernomyrdin. After debates had begun, the deputies paused to listen to mutually exclusive speeches of the chairman of the Legislative Assembly of Kuzbas Amantulev and the head of the administration of the Kemerovo district, Mikhail Kislyuk, also the address to the Duma by the chairman of the Federal Professional Union, Labor Unions, Shmakov. Incidentally, today, for the first time, Tatiana Paramonova appeared on camera. The deputies, despite the special extension for extra discussion, adopted no decision on the report of Alexis Kavets. The parliamentarians' views divided, and the Duma couldn't express a unanimous opinion. In the state space scientific manufacturing center called Hrunich, there were no massive layoffs nor delays with salaries. For almost 30 years, they've manufactured the carrier rocket Proton, is considered to be one of the best in the world, and according to specialists, will remain such until the year 2000. But the new super powerful rocket Angara, which will replace the Proton, will also be manufactured here. The plant is very often visited by foreigners. This year alone, there were 125 delegations. However, the main partner is the major American space corporation Lockheed. Lockheed. With it, a joint company was established, in the framework of which, with the aid of the Protons, commercial launches are performed for Western telecommunications satellites. One such launch brings the Russian treasury more than $60 million. And recently, with Lockheed, a contract was signed to create an energy module for the orbital station Alpha. This project is costly and therefore is under the careful watch of the American Congress. In the opinion of the Congress, cooperation with the Russian space firms is very lucrative, and the American side has already made its first input in the amount of $17 million. The Americans calculated that each dollar invested in a promising space program in 3 years will grow 50 times. For a long time, they had plans for their own orbital space station. However, they realized that they couldn't do it without Russian experience. The Americans spent billions of dollars on this program, but now we are approaching concrete results. We've begun work on a concrete energy block. Today in the Hrunic Center, apart from that, a service module for the station Alpha is being assembled, financed by the Russian Space Agency. The blocks and modules of Russian production will be carried into orbit by the domestic carrier Proton and the American ones by the Space Shuttle. The Alpha station will be 2 times larger than Mir. It will be capable of spending 15 years in orbit. In the international program, several European countries will participate, as well as Japan and Canada. In order to assemble the station completely, 5 years will be needed. The first launch is scheduled for 1997. Which cosmonaut will cross its doorstep first is more a political question, and it is currently under discussion with the Americans. In the Federative Council, the preparation of a law is almost completed concerning financial industrial groups. In essence, it will finally decide the rights of companies and the conditions of the free market. Interested in the law is all of Russian industry, including the military sector, which, in the opinion of the president of the League in support for defense companies, is enduring a critical period. During the next 5 or 6 months, the question will be completely closed. We will not be capable not only to do something for the defense sector, but will be also incapable of expressing our export potential. The realization of the draft law, in the opinion of Alexei Shalunov, allows to expect that in 10 or 15 years, Russia will export 30% of its goods and will not be a raw appendage for developed countries. And one must, of course, express enormous gratitude to the legislators, first of all to Nikolai Goncharov, that they demonstrated the initiative in creating such a law. The State Duma invited the Minister of Defense, Pavel Grachev, to make an appearance in the government's hour. The deputy, Nikolai Stolyrov, the initiator of the proposal, defined the theme of his possible report as the moral, psychological condition of the military service personnel in the Russian army, a monstrous, broad-scale political provocation directed against the leadership of the Ministry of Defense. The Minister of Defense of Russia, Pavel Grachev, called the latest publications in certain sources of mass media with accusations against the heads of the Russian military department. According to the Minister of Defense, the organizers of this campaign overstepped all legal and moral norms. This is said in today's official statement of Pavel Grachev. The Minister of Defense feels that the organizers of this campaign are attempting to force him to resign and are cynically exploiting the tragic death of the journalist. According to Interfax, Pavel Grachev addressed the Prosecutor General that he would institute proceeding against the authors of the publication, the newspaper Moskovsky Komsomolets. Criminal proceedings were instituted Thursday, according to the statute 130 slander and 131 insult, after the death as a result of the terrorist act. The correspondent of the Moskovsky Komsomolets, Dmitry Holodov, the newspaper published several materials in which it openly accused Pavel Grachev in involvement in corruption in the army. The investigative group of the Prosecutor General of Russia began to investigate the circumstances of the terrorist act, as a result of which Dmitry Holodov perished. Itar was told today in the Prosecutor General's office. The investigative group stated that in its work to establish the truth, it governs itself by the law alone and is not bound by any initial prejudices. We will do everything possible in order to solve this crime, and the guilty will face the court, it's noted in the document. Meanwhile, the ill-at-ease journalists are being intimidated in neighboring countries as well. For the 6th year, our journalists are working in conditions which are close to front conditions in Karabakh and border regions. But the television journalist Ara Abramyan, his plight befell him not from the combat zones from where he often reported, but in the driveway of his own home. Returning late in the evening from his usual broadcast from the cycle Face to Face, he was brutally beaten by an anonymous group armed with metal tools. In serious condition with a concussion of the brain and a multitude of facial bone injuries, the 33-year-old journalist was taken to one of the Yerevan clinics. Just recently in Yerevan, criminal attacks were launched on the editors of newspapers Ask and The Voice of Armenia. The harvest of 1994 has almost been completed. According to the Ministry of Agricultural Industry, Russian granaries have stored 89 to 90 million tons of grain. Not to be confused with the federal and regional funds, the peasants are in no rush to part with their grain. The government has purchased only 12 million tons, 2 times less than at the same time last year. By the results of the 9 months, one can predict what winter has in store for us. Let's say, for example, sugar beets. 18 million tons have been harvested. That is enough for 1,900,000 tons of sugar. That is 700,000 tons less than last year, and even then it was in short supply. Less by 1/4 is the production of milk, meat, livestock, and poultry. I didn't want to burden you with figures, but life forces us to become accountants and measure the balance of our wallets against the balance of the food market. The advantage is not in our favor. Although trade turnover in food products constantly grows, this absolutely doesn't mean that demand is increasing. On the contrary, it's decreasing. Prices are growing. And the supposedly cheaper foreign foods these days are not cheap at all. The dollar has jumped substantially and food is purchased outside the country for dollars. In order to somehow correct matters, the government decided to form, under the Ministry of Agricultural Industry, a federal food corporation. This is a sort of a prototype of a food central bank. In the idea of its creators, this corporation should accumulate reserves of food and effect intervention on the food market in order to control the turbulent growth of prices, which is blown up by processors and middlemen. In principle, it's a necessary thing. The civilized market should be formed and regulated by the government, but with how many good intentions of the government is the road paved to a bright economic future? So, dear compatriots, stock up on food for the winter. The consumer prices in Russia during the period from the 12th to 18th of October have increased by an average of 4.9%. That is, by more than 2 times. This was announced by the State Committee of Statistics. Previously, prices grew on an average by less than 2% weekly. After the plunge of the ruble to almost 4,000 rubles for $1 the 11th of October, according to the Stats Committee, the greatest jump was on non-food prices, 5.6%. The growth of prices for foods was 5.1%, payable services to the population 2.4%. And by another 7 points, the rate of the ruble has declined in today's trading at the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange, and it's fixed at the level of 3,022 rubles for $1 American dollar. The Belarusian parliament certified the status of the Belarusian ruble as the national currency, which recognizes it as the sole legal tender on the territory of the republic. The National Bank was given the right to establish the exchange rate in comparison to the Russian and other currencies and define the order of currency regulation. With the adoption of the parliamentary document, the circulation of other currency in the republic becomes illegal, which will force trade in cash dollars to go underground. The strengthening of their own currency, reducing by several times credit emissions, will be directed to heal the monetary system of the country and reduce inflation, which, according to the anti-crisis program, promises in 1 or 2 months to be 10 or 11%. For now, the decline in the rate of the Zaychik feels no brakes being applied. If in Russia the recent surge of the dollar was an urgent occurrence, in Belarus During this week alone, the appreciation of the dollar by 800 Belarusian nominations was not a major event, like the usual increase of prices, which, according to that same anti-crisis program, will be regulated by market rules, but under the eagle eye of the government. With such a policy, even a doubling of salaries for workers in the budget sphere, pensioners, students, and military service personnel, will not ensure them with sufficient social guarantees. The course for a ruthless battle with the inflationary serpent for now gives no response to many about how industry will begin to work, the recovery of which could realistically demonstrate the stability of the entire economy. Criminal charges, according to Statute 263, negligence, were filed by the military prosecutor because of the explosion on Thursday at the military stockpiles near Pskov. As a result of the fire at the military stockyards, 3 people died. 1 is in critical condition in hospital. There are injured among the military personnel. The Commission for Moscow continues to clarify the circumstances of the occurrence. There is no official conclusion yet. However, today it's clear that the most terrible scenario would have been if an explosion at the warehouse had occurred, which stores not less than 20 tons of TNT. The fire at that warehouse had already begun, but because of the Pskov firefighters was immediately extinguished. The cordoned-off area of the radius of 3 kilometers is not alleviated but intensified in order to find and dismantle the undetonated projectiles there. To the aid of the Pskov military, the field engineers from St. Petersburg have arrived. There were no injuries to nearby towns or villages. Reasons for the fire are being clarified. The Moscow Emergency Response Service today celebrates its 75th anniversary. From 5,000 to 7,000 calls ring out daily in the dispatch service of the Emergency Response Unit. That means 5,000 to 7,000 times the brigade on duty responds to calls. Auto crashes, heart attacks, the most terrible things, and now more often wounds, knife, bullet wounds, all sorts. During the last years in Moscow, mortality has doubled. Excuse the harsh medical reality, but daily 130 to 140 corpses pass through the service. We in the newspapers often spoke about the woes of the service, a shortage of vehicles, medications, and equipment. Now, thank God, somehow there's been some progress. We are financed. We are one of those organizations within the system of city health care, which in practice is fully financed. We're going to receive new medical response vehicles. And yet today, on the anniversary date, a little history. The tradition goes back to the Middle Ages in the homes for the wayward travelers. In Russia, the first 2 stations were opened in 1898. Then the first 8 carriages appeared. The creation of the service is connected with our most brilliant medical names. This is how the first special vehicle looked. Today in Moscow, there are 50 branches of the service. Brigades are on call in all points of the city. The services are vulnerable. We count the minutes and seconds of its delay, and this is understandable. Too much depends on these seconds. But let's remember this not just when we're waiting for aid. Let's allow them to pass, these red-crossed vehicles. For them, it's so terrible, so impermissible to be late. Today in Moscow, the 2 days of talks concluded on Russia joining the European Energy Charter. 3 years ago, the European Union began the path toward the agreement on the international cooperation in the area of energy. The pact was already joined by 51 countries who have agreed to remove any discrimination in the trade of energy resources, access to world markets, freedom of transit, and guarantees of disputes being examined by international arbitration. These rights will now also belong to Russia, which should join the Charter in November. However, Russia's joining will be done gradually. In the next years, it must still develop and adopt laws on energy, adapted overall to the conditions of the Western market. Today, there is no document in existence apart from the Charter which defines our strategy. As a result of the current talks, the first level was defined, the basic aim of which is to attract Western investment. Therefore, Russia must provide foreign investors the regime of preference. Several Arab countries in the zone of the Persian Gulf in November will be visited by the chairman of the government of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin. This was announced today at a briefing in the press center of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Agreement on the visit was reached during the visit to the region last week by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Kozyrev. The Prime Minister will visit Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, sanctioned the security organs and the army to conduct a broad-scale operation against the Hamas organization. These forces were provided an opportunity to use any measures for the full liquidation of the extremist Palestinian organization, especially its militant wing, Izzadin al-Qassem. During the declared war, again, mass arrests and deportation out of Israel of activists of the organization will be exercised. Despite the exhortations to stop violence issued by the president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, looting of trade institutions continues. Cases have increased of enraged crowds handing over to the American military members of the militant organizations which terrorize the population under the military regime. Achieving national reconciliation is the most difficult objective for President Aristide, inherited from the military who, during the 3 years of their rule, annihilated more than 4,000 compatriots. The paintings of Vereshchagin, Karuvin, Levitan, Ivazovsky, Malavin, Supanov, Konchalovsky, and Ion, almost 60 of these panels and paintings, a certain Igor Volodkotsky wanted to take out of our country. Formerly a dental technician, friend of the family of the chief of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Sholokov, and the Minister of Culture, Furtseva, former husband of her granddaughter. On his Volvo, hidden in his trunk of which were paintings removed from the frames and tightly rolled up, Volodkovsky calmly crossed the borders of the USSR, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and was detained only at the Austrian customs point. It turned the vehicle back to the Czech Republic. While the priceless paintings were kept in a steel safe of the border town Neumann, the stomatologist smuggler who got to Germany attempted to sue for at least part of this unique collection. It's valued, according to experts, at several $1 million. Today, the ambassador of Russia in Prague, Lebedev, warmly thanked everyone who helped return this national heritage to our country. Tomorrow in the morning, a collection of 65 paintings and other works of art of Russian masters of the last century by Aeroflot will be sent from Prague to Moscow. This was my last bit of information. In a moment, with the sports news, you will hear from Oksana Polonskaya. All the best. Hello. In the last few days, soccer was in the center of attention. Today we'll give preference to hockey. The lockout continues in the National Hockey League, and one may already speak about the mass return of players to their native clubs. As the agency Ichertas reports, on the 23rd of October, in the match Spartak against Dynamo, Vitaly Prokhorov and Nikolai Barshevsky will be playing. Already in Moscow, and with his first training session in Dynamo behind him, is Alexander Karpovtsov. Today in Moscow, press conference was held dedicated to the coming tournament of the team of stars of Russia to the children of Russia. On the Stars team will be 20 players from the NHL, headed by Vyacheslav Fetisov. The first match will be the 4th of November in Moscow against Spartak. And this is what the author himself of the idea, Vyacheslav Fetisov, said. People will remember this celebration their entire lives, because I think it will attract many more boys to the hockey section who will want to play like Mogilny, Fyodorov, Bure, and Ilarionov, Makarov, and Krutov play. I think that in all respects this will be something that is just like a dream. While the stars are convening in Moscow, the tournament of the International Hockey League continues. Today the Army hosted Pavlogava and lost with a score of 1-2. From other results, I'll note the defeat of Torpedoes from Yaroslavl by Sokol 2-4. Good evening. In the north of the European territory of Russia, the weather, as previously, will be defined by a cyclone, the center of which is near Abderma. Therefore, on the Kola Peninsula, in the Arhangelsk district, in the Nenets Autonomous District, and the Volga-Vyatsk region, there will be isolated periods of wet snow. Temperature at night, 0-5, during the day, +2 to 6. In the Republic of Komi at night, -3 to 7, during the day, 0-5. The northeast areas of the central region, because of the proximity of the cyclone, there's a probability of precipitation. Day temperatures +1 to 5. In the Karelia, Leningrad, and Kaliningrad districts in the Baltic countries, in Belarus, and also the northwest region of Russia, in a zone of high atmospheric pressure, partly cloudy skies without precipitation. In the morning hours, isolated patches of fog. At night, 0-4, during the day, +4 to 7. The south and the central parts of Russia will be under the influence of an anticyclone, which has shifted from the east of Ukraine to the lower Volga. Therefore, in the central and central Chernozem areas, on the central and lower Volga, in the northern Caucasus, in the Stavropol and Krasnoyarsk Rim areas, and the lower Don, the day will be sunny. In the central Chernozem area and over the central Volga during the day, +2 to 5. In the Rostov district and on the lower Volga, +6 to 9. In the northern Caucasus, the Krasnodar and Stavropol Rim areas, it will be +7 to 12. And on the Black Sea coast of the Krasnodar area, +17 to 19 degrees. Near Tuapse and Novorossiysk, gusty winds will remain up to 20 meters per second. In Moldova, Ukraine, and Crimea, partly cloudy skies without precipitation. In Ukraine, +3 to 8. In Moldova and Crimea, 9 to 12 degrees. In Georgia and Armenia, it's sunny and dry, +18 to 21. In Azerbaijan, partly cloudy skies with brief rains, temperatures of +10 to 12. In Moscow, partly cloudy skies without precipitations. Winds are westerly at night -1 to 3 during the day, +4 to 6 on Sunday, 2 to 3 degrees warmer. This was information compiled by the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia. I wish you a wonderful disposition during the weekend, and the Russian Food Bank hopes that your morning will be pleasant. Goodbye.